Good evening. Welcome tonight to our interview with Kirstin Kahaloa. She's candidate for State House District 6. Conducting our interview tonight is Michaela Akuchi. Before we start our interview, a little bit of information about HULI PAC. HULI PAC was birthed from a shared drive to rework our system by seeking āina-based, equity-focused leadership for our Hawai'i Island community. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are willing to circle back to our roots and instill real change in our community from Kona to Ka'u to Hilo to Hawi. The time is now to huli the system. Michaela?
Okay, so first, I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you so much for being here, Kirstin. My first question is more of just wanting to expand on the introduction. So tell us a little bit about yourself, what inspired you to run for office, and what are some of your core values that you feel will have an influence on your term if you're elected?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me, Michaela and Jeff. I'm just honored to be here, and opportunities that the HULI PAC is allowing for conversations with all of the candidates are just things that are really valuable for anyone that is voting and has the opportunity to vote here in Hawaii. And for our island, the issues need to be known so people can make informed decisions when they go to vote. But aloha, mai kako, my name is Kirstin Kahaloa, and I am running for the State House District 6 seat. It is a newly created State House seat, so it's an open seat, which means during the apportionment, if people aren't familiar with the seat, the district lines were moved and a new seat was created and kind of plopped in the central area of Kona. And so we get an extra voice and an extra seat at the table at the state legislature representing Kona. And I'm just very honored and grateful that when the reapportionment happened, I happened to live in the district, and it just made me think about engaging and getting involved and being a voice and having a seat at the table at the legislature. So it's really exciting that we move from 7 state house seats to now 8 with this new seat, and then our 4 Senate voices for Hawai'i Island. It's a great opportunity and a great time to be a part of the conversation. And so just a little bit about me and my background. I'm born and raised in Hawaii and happy and proud to be Native Hawaiian and raised here in the best place to call home. It's very important that we get to live in such a beautiful, vibrant, culturally dynamic and diverse community that's somewhat unique to any place in the entire world. So just happy to call this place home. I live in District 6 in Holualoa, Makai. So close to between Kailua and Keauhou is where I reside. And that's part of the district. And that's what intrigues me to run, is to make an impact in our community. But my family is also from here. So they're from Opihikau in Puna. We have family Hawaiian roots also in Ka'u and in Waipio Valley. So, you know, our family is deeply rooted here, and my mom also grew up in Hilo. So not only do I believe I represent a voice for Kona, I feel that the dynamism of my family coming from this island makes me really dedicated to really what's happening across the island and across the state. But I think what makes me really excited to be a candidate is I'm a mother and a Native Hawaiian woman, and still under 40, with a little bit more time, to be considered a younger candidate and just representing the younger voices here in our community. And I think it's an opportune time. I see myself as a bridge builder, a collaborator, and I think we need that at the legislature and here in Hawaii as ways to find positive solutions. It's not always a yes or a no. It's how do we do this, and how do we do this right, and how do we do it together? And let's sit at the table and have conversations on how to get that done. So I'm just really excited to have the opportunity to serve this community and this island, and bring all that I've learned, all the experience that I have had over the years to help me make decisions that represent the voice of our community.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. My next question has to expand on that a little bit. How have you advocated for your community? And are there any particular community projects that you've worked on that you're proud of or would like to highlight?
Sure. Just a little bit, a lot of my professional background since I've been back home after school has just been about serving community and advocating for community. I moved back home to work as executive director of the Kona Kohala Chamber of Commerce. So it gave me an opportunity to advocate for community, but really on a macro level of support and really looking at industry and looking at economic drivers that impact the community as a big whole. So oftentimes industries that are larger economic drivers in our community were areas that stood out and worked with groups to advocate in that space and represent that member nonprofit organization. But I really wanted to kind of get more intimate and be able to advocate on a deeper level. So I worked at Blue Zones Project and worked on community health and well-being. And some of the things that I think were meaningful is being able to collaborate with businesses, schools, religious organizations, all levels and different sectors of the community to focus on ways we can help elevate well-being on our island. And we're the first countywide Blue Zones Project approved community in the nation. So I think that's something to really be proud of. And some of the policy work around helping get a food access coordinator established here on a county level. We did advocacy work to just bring all the food people, businesses, farmers, anyone doing food to a similar commonplace table. And what that allowed is for the creation of the Hawai'i Island Food Alliance, HIFA, as some people call it. And that allowed for conversations, which then moved on to collaborations around starting the application for Build Back Better and being the only project in Hawaii to be approved and win award funding for that to help with our local food system. So that was super impassioned. And the other thing I was really passionate about is just really being able to bring people around volunteerism for āina-based community projects. So seed collection, removing invasives. I'm really anti-invasive species. I want to just cut them all out and remove them in a pretty erratic way. How do we just impact community is really important. And so those are just a few examples of some things I got to be a part of.
Thank you. My next question is, do you think that the current state legislature is effective? If yes, why? And if not, what do you think needs improvement?
You know, for me, it's all about collaboration. And I think there's always ways we can be better, do better. And I think there are things that are effective at the legislature, but maybe there's ways to, again, huli out or huli the system, as you folks believe in. There's always opportunities for positive change, whether things are ineffective or effective. And so my whole goal is I think we do have some amazing legislators representing our communities right now. And I hope to stand up and be an additional voice that matches the work that they're doing, the funding they're bringing to our communities and our schools and our kids and our families. So how we can collectively work together, I think is important. I think there's ways between state and council, between state level leaders and our mayor. I think there's opportunities to just talk story more, because I think we can really champion around efforts if we just, hey, let's talk about it. But oftentimes I think it's because everybody's just in the weeds of the work that is in their kuleana and in their sphere. And so oftentimes it's in passing where you realize, oh gosh, we really do need to have conversations because we're passionate about similar issues, but we're all working on them in little pieces. So how we work together, I think, is really important.
Thank you. My next question is, what are some critical issues that have arisen in the district that you would like to represent that you think could be addressed by the state legislature? And what ideas do you have to address some of these issues?
Yes, I think, I know a lot of people have this as part of their platform, but I think it's a statewide issue and not just here in Kona, but you know, the cost of living and housing, of course, is a critical component to need. And I think every elected official at all levels need to work together and potentially look at this as a crisis for Hawaii, that we do not have enough places to live. If our basic needs aren't met here in Hawaii, people can't stay here, people can't afford to live there. And so I think we need to kind of level up the urgency to make impactful change in the housing space, and how we can work collectively to do that is important. But you know, part of it is coming together and focusing on the issues that are most important and putting funds and resources to housing. I know the median price of a home is the lowest here on Hawai'i Island than anywhere else in the state. We waver around 500,000 to 550,000, but that's as an island. We know that Kona is a couple 100,000 higher, and I laugh, but that's not the right thing. It's much, much higher here. And one reason I'm running for office is to ensure that our kids have a future to be able to still live here and own a home and have āina or own land and property and be able to flourish and live here. So some of our basic needs need to be addressed. I think the other critical issue for me is access to care. We know that our communities really, I believe, have consensus around building a new hospital in Kona. But within that, we have higher ed institutions like Washington State University, Arizona State University, providing some educational opportunities. Housing is one of the reasons we struggle with access to care, having enough nurses, enough doctors, enough healthcare professionals here in our community. So it's not just building a new hospital, it's all the wraparound services that are necessary for access to care for our community. And we know we have a high aging population here on our whole island. So how do we make sure that people don't have to transport to Oahu for those services? I had to have my daughter on Oahu and I did not want to. And my grandfather is currently on Oahu because Kona Hospital sent him there. So, you know, you also struggle with connecting with your family when there's health emergencies and crises, and that kind of rips families apart. So how we can really better support access to care, I think, is a critical issue for Kona.
That's super important. Yeah. And kind of like building on what you mentioned about affordable housing, you know, homelessness has remained a problem statewide, including on Hawai'i Island. Of course, this affects every demographic, but I think for me, it's one of the biggest tragedies when I see fellow Kanaka, because I'm also Native Hawaiian, when I see fellow Kanaka being houseless and having nowhere to go due to this really extreme wealth disparity that we are witnessing here. What ideas do you have to come to grips with this persistent homelessness problem that we're experiencing?
Great question. And it's a really critical need in our community. And as you can see, and you just attested to, there are layers of things that are happening that all kind of bubble up to each other with housing, with cost of living, with affordability. So with homelessness in particular, I think one of the things that's really critical, and this is something the state house can only help support, but funding from the state was provided to the counties for affordable housing and for homeless in particular. I know a lot of people were concerned about the location of Village 9 or homeless housing options, but basic needs must be met for communities in need. And we have been given, I think, the county funding to be able to achieve that. So actually pushing to ensure that some of these commitments are actually followed through on, I think, is really critical. And that would be really for community members and council and the mayor's office to really say, hey, we committed to starting this, we need to complete this. And if it's not Village 9, well, what is it and where, and move forward and meet that commitment. Of course, we need total wraparound services for those that are homeless. There's education, there's, you know, help getting into workforce, not just ensuring that there are housing needs. So how we invest in those well-being needs and mental health support services are really critical. But for housing, we need more housing so that we don't have homeless issues. If we have more capacity of housing at all income levels and all types, single family homes are not the only type of housing in Hawaii. And that's actually urban sprawl. We're rural communities. We can have different types of visions of housing, definitely not skyscrapers, but there are different models to support different income levels to ensure that everyone has a place to live. And that needs to be a high priority.
Thank you. My next question has to deal with specifically Native Hawaiian rights. In your opinion, how can we best forge a path towards the restoration of illegally occupied lands?
Yeah, I think so. I think some steps are to start with having more voices at the table where we can make impact in all industries and all levels, not just policymakers. We need business owners. We need people in all industries so that we can obtain our rights back as Native Hawaiians. But I think we do know that master leases for military are coming up fairly soon. And how we work with the military to have conversations to return lands back to Native Hawaiians, I think is a critical conversation. I don't think it's an all or nothing. I think there needs to be concessions made and payment of higher rent to be able to stay here in Hawaii if that's what community wants to do. But lands have to be partially or restored. It just can't be the amount of quantity of lands that are currently there. But I think part of it too is just restoration of connecting Native Hawaiians to āina through housing, through different opportunities for access. When we're removed from access to āina, that's an unhealthy way for Hawaiians to live. It just doesn't sit right with our na'au. And so how we do that is critical. And the one bright spot is that Native Hawaiians were given more funding for housing and for land via the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, and how we can ensure and collaborate and work together to ensure that we just put more Hawaiians in those opportunities as possible. And again, I think it's envisioning other ways to connect Native Hawaiians to āina or housing, not just in the single family model. Many people on the list are kupuna, and they may not need a 3 or 4 bedroom house, but could they own a smaller home or what's perfect for a kupuna, whether that's a townhome, or can you make a kauhale style kupuna homes where Native Hawaiian kupuna can live together and they own a piece of that property. I think it would be something pono, but we have to also remove people that are on the list and who have been there for generations.
Thank you. Okay, so telescopes, construction sites, and commercial activities in many areas of Hawai'i Island have been carried out in areas zoned as conservation. Do you believe that these special use permits are hindering our capacity to properly preserve our āina? And if so, why? And just kind of explain your answer either way.
Yeah, that category of special use permits and conservation land, I think we need to look at conservation lands in what it entails is for conservation. And I know within that scope, education is part of that, but it has to be education that's sustainable. In a conservation setting, can we look at a ahupua'a model of restoration within that process or within a Native Hawaiian context when we think of conservation? So I've never thought of this before, but maybe one opportunity is re-looking at what conservation means from a land use perspective when the land uses were decided and written up. A lot of it stemmed for the protection of agricultural lands. So when that's built from that mindset, maybe conservation wasn't the priority. And so I'm not sure, but when was the last time we looked at what does it mean to classify all the categories of land use? And what does conservation mean? And is that pono in what we see today, understanding the issues with land use that we have? So maybe reevaluating that will make a better connection to what stems with Native Hawaiian values of conservation versus maybe what is listed as different uses. So of course, special permits as well, maybe those shouldn't be allowed, and we should really reevaluate how we identify any kind of permit or usage for āina, period.
A serious issue that's facing Hawaii Islanders right now is the cost of food. It's just getting to be outrageous. What ideas do you have to combat the rising costs of food?
I think we need to really champion as a community around supporting and buying local. It supports farmers, it supports local ag. It's looking at really how do we support an industry already here in Hawaii and ensuring that it's good ag, it's small ag, that it doesn't get big to be big ag. But I think right now, if we don't look at different opportunities to potentially look at subsidizing or discounting for transportation. One of the issues we have on Hawai'i Island is Oahu, it's too costly for Oahu to consistently buy from neighbor islands. The transportation cost is not beneficial. So Oahu would like to grow their own ag. With what āina, you don't have that many opportunities to grow food. Hawai'i Island could feed the state. I believe that we have enough land that could be put to use to feed community, and how we do that I think is critical. But if we don't get to a certain capacity of supporting local, the cost is prohibitive and then it's too expensive. And we just have to look at kind of buying seasonally as well to make it more affordable to eat local. But one way, if people are saying it's cost prohibitive to buy local, Hawai'i Island was the first in the state to champion the double bucks program, where if you are I'm going to say SNAP, and I shouldn't use acronyms, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. If you are a beneficiary, you can get double the amount of locally grown food for half the price. So you actually get more, and it has to be classified as local. So you're supporting local farmers. So KTA was the first in the state to champion this. And now our food basket now is the provider of that program for the whole state of Hawaii. So those who qualify for SNAP program could actually eat way more local food and local produce, but you have to educate on how to eat those foods. We have to get keiki to be ma'a again to food that's grown local. And we also have to encourage farmers. Farmers are making a lot of their income from the visitor industry because they're asking for locally sourced items. So people are growing for the industry and not necessarily growing for the local taste of our community. But part of that is our local community has to buy local. So that pivots and that shifts. So we need to create programs and incentives for people to want to make that shift and really reduce our imports. If we're at 85 to 90% imports, as we know with the pandemic, it was a really shining moment that we could run out of food. And we shouldn't. We have enough āina that is for agriculture, some of it sitting fallow, and there's state lands. And, you know, as a state representative, I hope to really hold those accountable to those agricultural lands that we could be growing food and ensuring that we're using it because it's there. It's just being unused at this time.
That's a good point. Ironically, there was more local food available during the pandemic than there is now, and that's because of the food that goes to the tourist industry. So point.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can make one little bright spot point, but sure. In Kamehameha, as he was conquering our nation, conquering Hawaii, when he established new territory and boundaries, he would set up local agricultural systems, field systems to feed community, because that was a priority. I'm now in charge to steward this area, I've conquered it. Now I have to ensure that people are fed. So as he was conquering, he was setting up agricultural fields. And in Kohala, we have a Kona field system here, but Kohala was one of the largest field systems growing food in the nation, maybe in the world. They were feeding over 120 or 140,000 people and feeding them well. And so we can feed ourselves. We have a history of that. We just have to kind of go back to feeding community and caring for the priority that we can feed ourselves. But again, some of it is pivoting that ono and that taste, you know, from plate lunches and mac salad, can we do wala salad, ulu salad instead? You know, it's starting to shift that, or from rice to indigenous crops that we have. And we're so lucky here in West Hawaii that we have the ulu co-op doing food processing here within our district and on the Hilo side as well. And they're pre-processing indigenous crops, locally made, locally sourced, but we have to, again, teach community not only to consume them, but to use them, and then also to scale up, right? To ensure that we have more indigenous crops to continue to feed community.
Thank you. Michaela?
Thank you. My next question has to do with diversified and circular economy and labor. How would you foster and nurture small businesses? And, you know, you kind of touched on this a little bit, the importance of buying local, but how can we make locally sourced products, especially food products, just more accessible to the masses, particularly children?
Yeah, super passionate about this area. You know, when you work for a chamber of commerce, and I actually helped establish the reestablish the Hawai'i Island Native Hawaiian Chamber of Commerce. It's an island-wide organization. Workforce development is key, and how we ensure that people can not only get educated and have educational opportunities, but, you know, be trained to go into workforce, I think is really critical. But, you know, there's a lot of time, lots of conversations about when we diversify the economy, let's bring in new economies. But I really think we could bring in new economies, but we have economies here that are kind of neglected and could use a lot more support to bolster up. Small business is one of them. We have a lot of different accelerators, organizations really providing wraparound services to try to scale up entrepreneurship here in Hawaii. And I love what they're doing. I think it's important. Like Elemental Accelerator, we have Mana Up. There are just so many, Purple Maya, so many different opportunities. A new one for women, Found Her. These accelerators need additional support, but we also need community members kind of willing to learn and take the risk of figuring out what entrepreneurship looks like for them. If Kama'aina and Native Hawaiians are doing entrepreneurship, we know they will do it within the guise of a circular economy because it's part of who we are, it's part of our culture. And so I think it's connecting the pieces of new entrepreneurship opportunities. One thing I got to do during the pandemic as a passion project, all of the Native Hawaiian chambers and the Native Hawaiian Hospitality Association said, in a pandemic, how do we support Native Hawaiian owned businesses? What can we do? Training is difficult. We can do it virtually. Other people are doing it though. How can we help? And so what we did in our spare time is we built a website called kuhikuhi.com, and it's a listing of Native Hawaiian owned businesses across the state, because we thought if people are buying from Native Hawaiians, that's a circular economy that's supporting indigenous owned businesses, and that's important. And so I think we have 130 or so businesses listed and growing, but it's opportunities to put wraparound services around small business, I think is important, and that ingenuity. And I think Kanaka-minded business owners will think about circular economies and green businesses and Pono business practices as they're building out businesses that work for them.
Thank you. My next question has to do with food security and agriculture. We're kind of like going on a theme here. So the term food desert is used to refer to areas where residents only have access to fast food or convenience store options. So what would you do to help address some of these food desert areas so that way local residents have more access to healthier options?
We definitely have a lot of those on Hawai'i Island, and it's a really big issue. And when there's a food desert, that means Keiki and families have to travel long distances to get to a place to get food, like a grocery store or anywhere else. One thing I'm excited about is the legislature did pass a bill to support a pilot project for food hubs. And I was really championing in the community behind support to making that happen. It took a couple of years for that bill to pass, but it did. And so food hubs can help provide access in food deserts because what food hubs do is they aggregate from local farms across their region. Food hubs usually don't always buy from all over the place unless they don't have farms in their area. They'll support regional food aggregation and get that out to families. And so it doesn't need to be necessarily the traditional model of only going to the grocery store. And I think food hubs can provide hubs and spaces to be pickup points in food deserts as a start. And then again, a lot of our food hubs are SNAP approved organizations. I did some advocacy work to help some food hubs get approved, because if they get SNAP accessible, then folks who have higher food needs or are in rural communities or in food deserts can use the double bucks program, get double the local produce for that same price. So I think food hubs are a part of that. I also am really passionate about local food procurement to our schools. And I know Senator Kochi was championing that before the pandemic, and it always sticks with me, but he says that he was the first I've ever heard say this. He said that the largest restaurant in the state of Hawaii is the Department of Education, our local schools. So when we talk about increasing our local food production, if we committed our schools to sourcing 50% local, our farms would make more money. We'd have more farms and community. Our kids will be eating more local food. And for rural communities, I think that's really critical, because if they're sourcing local food from their region, they're learning what foods can grow in their areas, and potentially they can grow those things in their yards. And, we have the Ulu Co-op here on Hawai'i Island. To be an Ulu Co-op member and grow ulu, they say you only need maybe 1 to 2 trees. So if our families are able to have āina, able to have a home with a yard, they can be co-op members and have a side business to support their family in the high cost of living by having a couple of ulu trees. They can be native ulu, and I'm not a green thumb, but I know they're not the hardest things to grow. They're a little hardy, they're strong plants, and there's education and training, but we're helping our local food system, and families can take what they need to eat, but they can also sell the ulu that they've grown to the co-op and provide another income source. And so for communities with food deserts, they're learning how to grow food and then helping, but there's also opportunities to do community gardens in some of those desert areas as well. And there's just so many opportunities.
You had mentioned Ron Kauchi. Are there any House reps who you really identify with, who you think are really good legislators that you look forward to working with?
On the House side, there are so many more. There's more quantity of House reps. And I think for me, championing partnerships with those, I think with similar values, of course, the House reps in our community, I do know them and can pick up the phone if I need to have a conversation. So one thing I think is important, that the representatives on this island have strong pilina, strong communication with each other and can work together. And actually, I hope that If elected, I would try to kind of force us to pick a couple positions that we know collectively we agree on and we believe are important for our community. You know, the Senate always puts forward their priorities. The House puts forward their priorities. Can our island delegation put forward a list of priorities and say, we believe this together? And I know our island is very dynamic, very diverse. We have different issues in different parts of the island, but could we try to pick a couple things that we could do collectively? And honestly, that would be a big champion win for me, is if I could help build that collective collaboration a little.
Thank you. Michaela?
Thank you. Okay, so my next question has to deal with climate change mitigation. So currently, Hawaii's top emitting sector is transportation. What ideas do you have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from this particular sector?
We have such a large āina that, yes, we are driving a lot here. And how we potentially reduce that is really important. Of course, I truly believe, and I know we're a big island, that, you know, we could have energy efficient cars. We could have more hybrid or electric vehicles, but they are costly. Right now, with the cost of gas prices, they're almost impossible to find and own. But I think infrastructure to support, I think one thing that keeps people from making it accessible is we need more community places that have charging stations so people don't run out of battery somewhere in Puna or on the Mauna. So somewhere very remote, we need more access points and we need to work with collaborators. When we think of infrastructure, I'm really excited that Biden has funding coming to Hawaii for Build Back Better, but where are we spending those money and resources, and how much is allocated to Hawai'i Island would be really important to know, because we also need broadband access and a lot of other infrastructure pieces. But I think renewable energy is important to reduce greenhouse gases. I think there are opportunities in recycling and waste management as well. That's has been a very complicated issue that we're dealing with on this island. So how can we do better recycling? I think on Hawai'i Island, there's opportunities to have composting and teaching communities how to compost more. Then you're not dry. You know, a lot of communities have to drive to take their waste to the dump. And that again is more driving and more emissions. But I also think on an island with conservation land, with āina available to us, we can plant a whole bunch more trees. And hopefully, like I said before, it was very aggressive, remove invasives. There are so many, and plant more indigenous plants. And so groups that are really championing, you know, we can do carbon capture, and there are opportunities to, I think, create sustainable businesses around growing native plants and, you know, reforesting some areas that were really just taken away.
Thank you. My next question has to do with water and waste infrastructure. So half of our state cesspools, to be specific, 49,300, are on Hawai'i Island alone. And Hawaii County has been in violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act and EPA federal rules and regulations since 2010, when the county took over responsibility of the large capacity cesspools at Pahala and Na'alehu. So what do you suggest that we do to improve our aging infrastructure?
Yes, we have so many cesspools on this island, and I think West Hawaii has even more from a percentage across the island. We really do need to transition those to septic. I think there's not enough education, and 2050, the deadline to transition. I know large capacity cesspools had to transition sooner, but for the other cesspool conversions, 2050 seems, oh, I can deal with it later. We know on an island, our community can't all start converting cesspools 2 years prior and we reach our goal. we don't have that kind of capacity to shift all of them at the same time. So I think state government needs to look at opportunities to incentivize cesspool conversion. I am interested to learn how many businesses actually do that, and how can we elevate them and talk about them and really champion that, hey, you may need to convert your cesspool. Here are businesses that do this. And I think looking at state tax incentives, I think are important. I've also been thinking about, I know some people say, well, when someone sells a home that should they be required to do conversion before selling the home? Selling and buying homes, that's a really stressful process. So to add another layer of requirement might be difficult. But what if within selling or buying a home, there was some kind of incentive that the seller would get to incentivize them to do it within a meaningful amount of time? That might get people, when they're buying and selling homes, to convert in that transition, so it doesn't become the kuleana of whoever the next owner of that place is. But it really has to happen, and it has to happen soon. And I think we should really try to shoot for a 2040, that like, if state policy could commit to an earlier deadline to get people really focused, even though we have a larger deadline. But if the state said, no, we need to finish it early, to encourage that and strengthen the mandates around getting that done, because that will help our waters and our water systems.
Thank you. My next question has to do with marine life, and specifically the aquarium trade. So tens of thousands of Hawaii residents have actively opposed the reinstatement of the commercial aquarium trade that benefits mainland and international corporations mainly. Do you support closing this industry? And if so, why? If not, why as well?
Yeah, I know it's been a really hot topic, and I know some say that some are taking from our reefs and some are saying they are growing them and not taking from our reefs. Either way, it doesn't seem like a sustainable business and a business model that really aligns with Native Hawaiian community and values of selling animals and fish in our reefs, and how we protect that, I think, is important.
Thank you. My next question has to do with social issues. What solutions would you propose to combat the drug addiction crisis, particularly our methamphetamine epidemic?
I think some of the epidemics on drug use, start with access to just equity here in Hawaii, access to housing, access to healthcare, access to all of our basic needs. And when basic needs aren't met, that is when there are, drug abuses, spousal abuse, or other social issues that we face here in Hawaii. And we know that in rural communities and on Hawai'i Island, those statistics are higher than on Oahu, and they really need to be addressed. But I think we need to not just look at social welfare programs, addiction programs. We need to look at what are some of these underlying causes. If we're not strengthening families in the home, if we're not providing access to education, access to food and basic needs, that's when I think things go wrong. So strengthening the basic needs in Hawaii so families can be strong, then families can support those in need and be a foundation and precursor to some of those support systems. It's part of that well-being. If our community is not well, then those things are going to be more prevalent in our communities, and how we combat them is really important.
You had mentioned access to medical care. And of course, we're having one of the big issues facing us now is the Supreme Court striking down Roe versus Wade. And here on Hawai'i Island, there's no Planned Parenthood organization for young women to go. If they choose to have an abortion, they have to fly to Honolulu, which is really unfortunate. Do you think the state should take a more active role in making abortions available to women on Hawai'i Island?
Definitely. Access to all forms of healthcare, including abortions, I think are critical as a right. And, you know, rural communities, it's really, again, it's difficult for emergency services to have to travel to Oahu, but having a young woman or any woman or anyone that seeks an abortion to have to travel to do that, have the funds to do that, have the support system to make those decisions of what's important to them. It's really hard, and you need accessibility of those resources available on all islands across the state. We need at least one place on our island. We really should have more than one, but we do need to strengthen those opportunities and ensure, you know, we know that Hawaii does have some of the strongest abortion rights policies in the nation, but ensuring that we continue to strengthen them and evaluate those in light of the overturning of Roe v. Wade is also critical. But yes, it should be a woman's right. And although we have strong policies, if we don't have access for neighbor islands, it's to some would say that it's still not fair. You know, policy is one thing, access is another. So we need to improve access to those services.
Okay. Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I've really enjoyed, it's been a great interview, and thank you, Michaela, for helping conduct the interview. I wish we could chat further, but unfortunately we have to get on to our next interview. We're building something that the Hawaii political establishment has never seen, a slate of Pono leaders. Your donations can help HULI the system. So if you're interested in getting more information on HULI PAC, then please, or make a donation, then please visit our website, hulihigh.com. That's HULIHI.com. Thank you again, Kirstin Kahaloa, candidate for State House District 6.
Aloha.